Welcome. I am Daisy, your hostess. For those with vivid imagination, we are at the Campus Martius in Rome with Plotinus. The time period is around 243 CE, where Plotinus is delivering his lectures on the Enneads. He's a Greek Platonist philosopher, though not a direct student of Plato. He is regarded by modern scholars as the founder of Neoplatonism. I have dedicated the first video of this series for the introduction of Plotinus, so please make sure to visit our playlist. You'll find it in there somewhere. There was a lot of flux in both politics and religion during that era. There were a lot of mystery cults. By the time that Plotinus was walking around, it had been a bit over 200 years since the death of Jesus. Keep in mind, church and state politics were fused. It was not until the late 18th century that the concept of separation of state and church, both in Europe and the United States, came about. The formal separation in the United States took shape with the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which was ratified in 1791, which prohibits Congress from establishing a religion or interfering with the free exercise thereof. Looking back in time, to 332 CE, a few years after Plotinus' death, Constantine looked for ways to control the masses and commissioned the assembly of Christian scriptures for use in the churches of his new capital, Constantinople. Interesting that soon after his death, the canonical books of the Christian Bible were enumerated and approved by various councils and popes of the Catholic Church, beginning with the Council of Rome in 382 AD or CE, whichever you prefer. This constituting the Bible as we know it today, which, if you do some research, has gone through numerous revisions and translations. A point to consider in all this is the evolution of Christianity as we know it today didn't happen in one day. It morphed from those very mystery cults of the past. And it looked to shake its pagan roots. I bring this up because Plotinus was very key to this. He lived before Constantine. His material and ideas were floating about. I believe the ideas of Plotinus became fodder for Christianity. Many of his ideas were integrated into Christian thought. Keep in mind, he was heavily influenced by Plato. And without making too much of it or oversimplifying, separating and understanding the branch of philosophy and religion, both of which seek to answer some very profound questions. See, philosophy relies on rational inquiry, critical thinking, and logical reasoning to explore those fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, ethics, reality, and often questioning and analyzing the beliefs without necessarily accepting a divine authority. While on the other hand, religion is centered on faith and divine revelation, incorporating spiritual practices, rituals, singing, doctrines, and sacrifice to provide for that moral guidance and a sense of divine purpose. And as we get into these Third Ennead and groupings of tractates, I want you to look for these concepts. Plotinus' philosophy on love and also a divine providence. And you'll notice here on love, he explores the nature of divine love as a unifying force that connects the one, the intellect, and the soul, emphasizing that love is that force that draws the soul towards the divine. And as he goes through that rational process, he takes us on how he got to that concept. And he does the same critical thinking as he proposes the divine providence and discusses the concept as providence being that guiding and governing principle of the universe, emphasizing that the one, as the ultimate source, emanates all existence with perfect intelligence and goodness. So I want you to think about that and how do these echo the love and providence as defined in today's popular religion? As I mentioned before, again, through Plotinus' work, we get a glimpse of man's search and his understanding of the world about him, and provides us with a piece of the puzzle as how we got here. And it's important to remember that this is not the whole of the puzzle, simply a piece. We're all on a journey. There are many more interesting points, but I will leave those for you to pull out, and I look forward to your comments. And with that, I turn the page. The Enneads of Plotinus, translated by Stephen McKenna. Third Ennead, Third Tractate. Providence, Second treatise. 1. What is our answer? All events and things, good and evil alike, are included under the universal reason principle of which they are parts, strictly included, for this universal idea does not engender them but encompasses them. The reason principles are acts or expressions of a universal soul. Its parts, i.e., events, good and evil, are expressions of these soul parts. This unity, soul, has different parts. The reason principles, correspondingly, will also have their parts, and so too will the ultimates of the system, all that they bring into being. The souls are in harmony with each other, and so too are their acts and effects. But it is harmony in the sense of a resultant unity built out of contraries. All things, as they rise from a unity, come back to unity by a sheer need of nature. Differences unfold themselves, contraries are produced, but all is drawn into one organized system by the unity at the source. The principle may be illustrated from the different classes of animal life. There is one genus, horses. Though horses among themselves fight and bite and show malice and angry envy, so all the others within the unity of their kind, and so humanity. All these types, again, can be ranged under the one kind, that of living things. Objects without life can be thought of under their specific types, and then be resumed under the one kind of the non-living. If we choose to go further yet, living and non-living may be included under the one kind, beings, and further still, under the source of being. Having attached all to this source, we turn to move down again in continuous division. We see the unity fissuring as it reaches out into universality, and yet embracing all in one system, so that with all its differentiation, it is one multiple living thing, an organism in which each member executes the function of its own nature while it still has its being in that one whole. Fire burns, horse does horse work, men give each other the appropriate act of the peculiar personal quality, and upon the several particular kinds to which each belongs follow the acts, and the good or evil of the life. 2. Circumstances are not sovereign over the good of life, for they are themselves molded by their priors and come in as members of a sequence. The leading principle holds all the threads, while the minor agents, the individuals, serve according to their own capacities. As in a war, the generalissimo lays down the plan, and his subordinates do their best to its furtherance. The universe has been ordered by a providence that may be compared to a general. He has considered operations, conditions, and such practical needs as food and drink, arms and engines of war. All the problem of reconciling these complex elements has been worked out beforehand so as to make it probable that the final event may be success. The entire scheme emerges from the general's mind with a certain plausible promise, though it cannot cover the enemy's operations, and there is no power over the disposition of the enemy's forces. But where the mighty general is in question, whose power extends over all that is, what can pass unordered? What can fail to fit into the plan? 3. For even though the I is sovereign in choosing, yet by the fact of the choice the thing done takes its place in the ordered total. Your personality does not come from outside into the universal scheme. You are a part of it, you and your personal disposition. But what is the cause of this initial personality? This question resolves itself into two. Are we to make the Creator, if Creator there is, the cause of the moral quality of the individual, or does the responsibility lie with the creature? Or is there perhaps no responsibility? After all, None is charged in the case of plants brought into being without the perceptive faculties. No one is blamed because animals are not all that men are, which would be like complaining that men are not all that gods are. Reason acquits plant and animal and their market. How can it complain because men do not stand above humanity? If the approach simply means that man might improve by bringing from his own stock something towards his betterment, we must allow that the man failing in this is unanswerable for his own inferiority. But if the betterment must come not from within the man but from without, from his author, it is folly to ask more than has been given, as foolish in the case of man as in plant and animal. The question is not whether a thing is inferior to something else, but whether in its own kind it suffices to its own part. Universal equality there cannot be. Then the reason principle has measured things out with the set of purpose of inequality? Certainly not. The inequality is inevitable by the nature of things. The reason principle of this universe follows upon a phase of the soul. The soul itself follows upon an intellectual principle, and this intellectual principle is not one among the things of the universe, but is all things. In all things, there is implied variety of things. Where there is variety and not identity, there must be primals, secondaries, tertiaries, and every grade downward. Forms of life, then, there must be that are not pure soul, but the dwindling of souls enfeebled stage by stage of the process. There is, of course, a soul in the reason principle constituting a living being, but it is another soul, a lesser phase, not that the supreme soul from which the reason principle itself derives. And this combined vehicle of life weakens as it proceeds towards matter, and what it engenders is still more deficient. Consider how far the engendered stands from its origin, and yet, what a marvel! In sum, nothing can secure to a thing of process the quality of the prior order, loftier than all that is product and amenable to no charge in regard to it. The wonder is only that it reaches and gives to the lower at all, and that the traces of its presence should be so noble. And if its outgiving is greater than the lower can appropriate, the debt is the heavier. All the blame must fall upon the unreceptive creature, and providence be the more exalted. 4. If man were all of one piece, if he were nothing more than a made thing, acting and acted upon according to a fixed nature, he could be no more subject to reproach and punishment than the mere animals. But as the scheme holds, man is singled out for condemnation when he does evil, and this with justice. For he is no mere thing made to rigid plan. His nature contains a principle apart and free. This does not, however, stand outside of providence or of the reason of the all. The overworld cannot be cut off from the world of sense. The higher shines down upon the lower, and this illumination is providence in its highest aspect. The reason principle has two phases, one which creates the things of process and another which links them with the higher beings. These higher beings constitute the over-providence on which depends that lower providence which is the secondary reason principle, inseparably united with its primal. The two, the major and minor providence, acting together, produce the universal woof, the one all-comprehensive providence. Men possess, then, a distinctive principle, but not all men turn to account all that is in their nature. There are men that live by one principle and men that live by another, or rather by several others, the least noble. For all these principles are present even when not acting upon the man, though we cannot think of them as lying idle. Everything performs its function. But it will be said, what reason can there be for their not acting upon the man once they are present? Inaction must mean absence. We maintain their presence always, nothing void of them, but surely not where they exercise no action. If they necessarily reside in all men, surely they must be operative in all, this principle of free action especially. First of all, this free principle is not an absolute possession of the animal kinds, and is not even an absolute possession to all men. So this principle is not the only effective force in all men? There's no reason why it should not be. There are men in whom it alone acts, giving its character to the life, while all else is but necessity, and therefore outside of blame. For in the case of an evil life, whether it is that the constitution of the man is such as to drive him down the troubled paths, or whether the fault is mental or spiritual in that the desires have gained control, we are compelled to attribute the guilt to the substratum, something inferior to the highest principle in man. We would be naturally inclined to say that this substratum, the responsible source of evil, must be matter, and not, as our argument implies, the reason principle. It would appear that not the reason principle, but matter were the dominant, crude matter at the extreme, and then matter as shaped in the realized man. But we must remember that to this free principle in man, which is a phase of the old soul, the substratum, the direct inferior to be molded, is not matter, but the reason principle itself, with whatever that produces and molds to its own form, so that neither crude matter nor matter organized in our human total is sovereign within us. The quality now manifested may be probably referred to the conduct of a former life. We may suppose that previous actions have made the reason principle now governing within us inferior in radiance to that which ruled before. The soul which later will shine out again is for the present at a feebler power. And any reason principle may be said to include within itself the reason principle of matter, which therefore it is able to elaborate to its own purposes, either finding it consonant with itself or bestowing upon it the quality which makes it so. The reason principle of an ox does not occur except in connection with the matter appropriate to the ox kind. It must be by such a process that the transmigration of which we read in Plato takes place. The soul must lose its nature, the reason principle be transformed. Thus there comes the ox soul which once was man. The degradation then is just. Still, how did the inferior principle ever come into being, and how does the higher fall to it? Once more, not all things are firsts. There are secondaries and tertiaries of a nature inferior to that of their priors, and a slight tilt is enough to determine the departure from the straight course. Further, the linking of any one being with any other amounts to a blending such as to produce a distinct entity, a compound of the two. It is not that the greater and the prior suffers any diminution of its own nature. The lesser and secondary is such from its very beginning. It is in its own nature the lesser thing it becomes, and if it suffers the consequences, such suffering is merited. All our reasonings on these questions must take account of previous livings as the source from which the present takes its rise. 5. There is, then, a providence which permeates the cosmos from first to last, not everywhere equal, as in a numerical distribution, but proportioned, differing according to the grades of place, just as in some one animal linked from first to last, each member has its own function, the nobler organ the higher activity, while others successively concern the lower degrees of the life, each part acting of itself and experiencing what belongs to its own nature and what comes from its relation with every other. Strike, and what is designed for utterance gives forth the appropriate volume of sound, while other parts take the blow in silence, but react in their own especial movement. The total of all the utterance and action and receptivity constitutes what we may call the personal voice, life, and history of the living form. The parts, distinct in kind, have distinct functions. The feet have their work and the eyes theirs. The understanding serves to one end, the intellectual principle to another. But all sums to a unity, a comprehensive providence, from the inferior grade downwards is fate. The upper is providence alone. For in the intellectual cosmos, all is reason principle or its priors, divine mind, and unmingled soul. And immediately upon these follows providence, which rises from divine mind, is the content of the unmingled soul, and through this soul is communicated to the sphere of living things. This reason principle comes as a thing of unequal parts, and therefore its creations are unequal, as for example, the several members of one living being. But after all this allotment of rank and function, all act consonant with the will of the gods, keeps the sequence, and is included under the providential government, for the reason principle of providence is God-serving. All such right doing, then, is linked to providence, but it is not therefore performed by it. Men or other agents, living or lifeless, are causes of certain things happening, and any good that may result is taken up again by providence. In the total, then, the right rules, and what has happened amiss is transformed and corrected. Thus, to take an example from a single body, the providence of a living organism implies its health. Let it be gashed or otherwise wounded, and that reason principle which governs it sets to work to draw it together, knit it anew, heal it, and put the affected parts at rights. In sum, evil belongs to the sequence of things, but it comes not from providence, but from necessity. It originates in ourselves. It has its cause, no doubt, but we are not therefore forced to it by providence. Some of these causes we adapt to the operation of providence and of its subordinates, but with others we fail to make the connection. The act, instead of being ranged under the will of providence, consults the desire of the agent alone, or of some other element in the universe, something which is either itself at variance with providence, or has set up some such state of variance in ourselves. The one circumstance does not produce the same result wherever it acts. The normal operation will be modified from case to case. Helen's beauty told very differently on Paris and on Idomeneus. Bring together two handsome people of loose character and two living honorably, and the resulting conduct is very different. A good man meeting a libertine exhibits a distinct phase of his nature, and similarly the dissolute answer to the society of their betters. The act of the libertine is not done by providence or in accordance with providence. Neither is the action of the good one done by providence. It is done by the man. But it is done in accordance with providence, for it is an act consonant with the reason principle. Thus a patient following his treatment is himself an agent, and yet is acting in accordance with the doctor's method inspired by the art concerned with the causes of health and sickness. What one does against the laws of health is one's act, but an act conflicting with the providence of medicine. 6. But if all this be true, how can evil fall within the scope of seership? The predictions of the seers are based on observation of the universal circuit. How can this indicate the evil with the good? Clearly, the reason is that all contraries coalesce. Take, for example, shape, and its contrary, matter. The living being of the lower order is a coalescence of these two, so that to be aware of the shape and the reason principle is to be aware of the matter on which the shape has been imposed. The living being of the compound order is not present as pure and simple idea, like the living being of the intellectual order. In the compound entity, we are aware at once of the reason principle and of the inferior element brought under form. Now the universe is such a compound living thing. To observe, therefore, its content is to be aware not less of its lower elements than of the providence which operates within it. This providence reaches to all that comes into being. Its scope, therefore, includes living things with their actions and states, the total of their history at once overruled by the reason principle, and yet subject in some degree to necessity. These then are presented as mingled both by their initial nature and by the continuous process of their existence. And the seer is not able to make a perfect discrimination setting on the one side providence with all that happens under providence, and on the other side what the substrate communicates to its product. Such discrimination is not for a man, not for a wise man or a divine man. One may say it is the prerogative of a god. Not causes but facts lie in the seer's province. His art is the reading of the scriptures of nature, which tell of the ordered and never condensed to the disorderly. The movement of the universe utters its testimony to him, and before men and things reveal themselves, brings to light what severally and collectively they are. Here conspires with there, and there with here, elaborating together the consistency and eternity of a cosmos, and by their correspondences revealing the sequence of things to the trained observer. For every form of divination turns upon correspondences. Universal disparity there could not be. There must be some measure of assimilation. This probably is the meaning of the saying that correspondences maintain the universe. This is a correspondence of inferior with inferior, of superior with superior, eye with eye, foot with foot, everything with its fellow, and, in another order, virtue with right action and vice with unrighteousness. Admit such correspondence in the all, and we have the possibility of prediction. If the one order acts on the other, the relation is not that of maker to thing made. The two are coeval. It is the interplay of members of one living being, each in its own place and way, moves as its own nature demands. To every organ its grade and task, and to every grade and task its effective organ. A single reason principle is at work. 7. And since the higher exists, there must be the lower as well. The universe is a thing of variety, and how could there be an inferior without a superior, or a superior without an inferior? We cannot complain about the lower in the higher, rather we must be grateful to the higher for giving something of itself to the lower. In a word, those that would like evil driven out from the all would drive out providence itself. What would providence have to provide for? Certainly not for itself or for the good. When we speak of providence above, we mean an act upon something below. That which resumes all under a unity is a principle in which all things exist together, and the single thing is all. From this principle, which remains internally unmoved, particular things push forth as from a single root which never itself emerges. They are a branching into part, into multiplicity, each single outgrowth bearing its trace of the common source. Thus, phase by phase, there is finally the production into this world, some things close still to the root, others widely separate in the continuous progression until we have, in our metaphor, bough and crest, foliage and fruit. At the one side, all is one point of unbroken rest. On the other is the ceaseless process, leaf and fruit, all the things of process carrying ever within themselves the reason principles of the upper sphere, and striving to become trees in their own minor order, and producing, if at all, only what is in strict gradation from themselves. As for the abandoned spaces in what corresponds to the branches, these too draw upon the root, from which, despite all their variance, they also derive, and the branches again operate upon their own furthest extremities. Operation is to be traced only from point to next point, but in the fact there has been both inflow and outgo of creative or modifying force, at the very root which itself again has its priors. The things that act upon each other are branchings from a far-off beginning, and so stand distinct, but they are derived initially from the one source. All interaction is like that of brothers, resemblant as drawing life from the same parents. End of the third tractate of the Third Ennead. We'll turn the page to the fourth tractate, Our Tutelary Spirit. 1. Some existence, absolute unity, and intellectual principle remain at rest while their hypostases are expressed ideas come into being. But in our view, the soul generates by its motion, generates the sensitive faculty considered as expression form, and the faculty of growth, in which soul extends to the vegetable order. Even as it is present in human beings, the soul carries this faculty of growth with it, but it is not the dominant, since it is not the whole man. In the vegetable order, it is the highest, since there is nothing to rival it. But at this phase, it is no longer reproductive, or at least what it produces is of quite another order. Here life ceases. All later production is lifeless. What does this imply? Everything the soul engenders down to this point of sheer lifelessness comes into being shapeless and takes form by orientation towards its author and supporter. Therefore, and even more certainly, the thing engendered on the further side can be no image of the soul. Since it is not even alive, it must be an utter indetermination. No doubt, even in things of the nearer order there was indetermination, but within a form. They were undetermined, not utterly, but only in contrast with their perfect state. At this extreme point, we have the utter lack of determination. Let it be raised to its highest degree, and it becomes body by taking such shape as serves its scope. Then it becomes the recipient of its author and sustainer. This presence in body is the only example of the boundaries of higher existence running into the boundary of the lower. 2. It is of this soul especially that we read, "All soul has care for the soulless," though the several souls thus care in their own degree and way. The passage continues, "Soul passes through the entire heavens in forms varying with the variety of place." The sensitive form, the reasoning form, even the vegetative form. And this means that in each place the phase of the soul, there dominant, carries out its own ends, while the rest, not present there, is idle. Now, in humanity the lower is not supreme, it is an accompaniment, but neither does the better rule unfailingly. The lower element also has a footing, and man, therefore, lives in part under sensation, for he has the organs of sensation, and in large part even by the merely vegetative principle, for the body grows and propagates. All the graded phases are in a collaboration, but the entire form, man, takes rank by the dominant, and when the life principle leaves the body, it is what it most intensely lived. This is why we must break away towards the high. We dare not keep ourselves set towards the sensuous principle, following the images of sense, or towards the merely vegetative, intent upon the gratifications of eating and procreation. Our life must be pointed towards the intellective, towards the intellectual principle, towards God. Those that have maintained the human level are men once more. Those that have lived wholly to sense become animals, corresponding in species to the particular temper of the life. Ferocious animals where the sensuality has been accompanied by a certain measure of spirit, gluttonous and lascivious animals where all has been appetite and satiation of appetite. Those who in their pleasures have not even lived by sensation, but have gone their way in a torpid grossness, become mere growing things. For only or mainly the vegetative principle was active in them, and such men have been busy betreeing themselves. Those, we read, that otherwise untainted have loved song become vocal animals. Kings ruling unreasonably, but with no other vice, are eagles. Feudal and flighty visionaries, ever soaring skyward, becoming high-flying birds. Observance of civic and secular virtue makes men again, or where the merit is less marked, one of the animals of communal tendency, a bee, or the like. 3. What, then, is the spirit guiding the present life and determining the future? The spirit of here and now. And the God? The God of here and now. Spirit, God, this in act within us conducts every life. For even here and now, it is the dominant of our nature. That is to say that the dominant is the spirit which takes possession of the human being at birth? No, the dominant is the prior of the individual spirit. It presides inoperative while its secondary acts, so that if the acting force is that of men of the sense life, the tutelary spirit is the rational being, while if we live by that rational being, our tutelary spirit is the still higher being, not directly operative, but assenting to the working principle. The words, "You shall yourselves choose your presiding spirit," are true then, for by our life we elect our own loftier. But how does this spirit come to the determinant of our fate? It is not when the life is ended that it conducts us here or there. It operates during the lifetime. When we cease to live, our death hands over to another principle this energy of our own personal career. That principle of the new birth strives to gain control, and if it succeeds, it also lives and itself, in turn, possesses a guiding spirit, its next higher. If, on the contrary, it is weighed down by the developed evil in the character, the spirit of the previous life pays the penalty. The evil liver loses grade because during his life, the active principle of his being took the tilt towards the brute by force of affinity. If, on the contrary, the man is able to follow the leading of his higher spirit, he rises, he lives that spirit, that noblest part of himself to which he is being led becomes sovereign in his life. This made his own, he works for the next above until he has attained the height. For the soul is many things, is all, is the above and the beneath to the totality of life, and each of us is an intellectual cosmos, linked to this world by what is lowest in us, but by what is the highest to the divine intellect. By all that is intellective, we are permanently in that higher realm, but at the fringe of the intellectual we are fettered to the lower. It is as if we gave forth from it some emanation towards that lower, or rather some act, which, however, leaves our diviner part not in itself diminished. 4. But is this lower extremity of our intellective phase fettered to body forever? No. If we turn, this turns by the same act. And the soul of the all, are we to think that when it turns from this sphere, its lower phase similarly withdraws? No, for it never accompanied that lower phase of itself. It never knew any coming, and therefore never came down. It remains unmoved above, and the material frame of the universe draws close to it and, as it were, takes light from it. No hindrance to it, in no way troubling it, simply lying unmoved before it. But has the universe then no sensation? It has no sight, we read, since it has no eyes and obviously has not ears, nostrils, nor tongue. Then has it perhaps such a consciousness as we have of our own inner conditions? No. Where all is the working out of one nature, there is nothing but still rest. There is not even enjoyment. Sensibility is present as quality of growth is unrecognized. But the nature of the world will be found treated elsewhere. What stands here is all that the question of the moment demands. 5. But if the presiding spirit and the conditions of life are chosen by the soul in the overworld, how can anything be left to our independent action here? The answer is that very choice in the overworld is merely an allegorical statement of the soul's tendency and temperament, a total character which it must express wherever it operates. But if the tendency of the soul is the master force, and in the soul, the dominant is that phase which has been brought to the force by a previous history, then the body stands acquitted of any bad influence upon it. The soul's quality exists before any bodily life. It has exactly what it chose to have, and we read it never changes its chosen spirit. Therefore, neither the good man nor the bad is the product of this life. Is the solution perhaps that man is potentially both good and bad, but becomes the one or the other by force of act? But what if a man temperamentally good happens to enter a disordered body, or if a perfect body falls to a man naturally vicious? The answer is that the soul, to whichever side it inclines, has in some varying degree the power of working the forms of body over its own temper. Since outlying and accidental circumstance cannot overrule the entire decision of a soul. Where we read that after the casting of lots, the sample lives are exhibited with the casual circumstance attending them, and that the choice is made upon vision, in accordance with the individual temperament, we are given to understand that the real determination lies with the souls who adapt the allotted conditions to their own particular quality. The Timaeus indicates the relation of this guiding spirit to ourselves. It is not entirely outside of ourselves, is not bound up with our nature, is not the agent of our action. It belongs to us as belonging to our soul, but not in so far as we are particular human beings living a life to which it is superior. Take the passage in this sense, and it is consistent. Understand the spirit otherwise, and there is contradiction. And the description of the spirit, moreover, as the power which consummates the chosen life, is also in agreement with this interpretation, for while its presidency saves us from falling much deeper into evil, the only direct agent within us is something neither above nor equal to it, but under it. Man cannot cease to be characteristically man. 6. What, then, is the achieved sage? One whose act is determined by the higher phase of the soul. It does not suffice to perfect virtue to have only the spirit equivalent in all man as cooperator in the life. The acting force in the sage is the intellective principle, the diviner phase of the human soul, which therefore is itself his presiding spirit, or is guided by a presiding spirit of its own, no other than the very divinity. But this exalts the sage above the intellectual principle as possessing for presiding spirit the prior to the intellectual principle. How then does it come about that he was not, from the very beginning, all that he is now? The failure is due to the disturbance caused by birth, though before all reasoning there exists the instinctive movement reaching out towards its own. An instinct which the sage finally rectifies in every respect? Not in every respect. The soul is so constituted that its life history and its general tendency will answer not merely to its own nature, but also to the conditions among which it acts. The presiding spirit, as we read, conducting a soul to the underworld ceases to be its guardian, except when the soul resumes in its later choice the former state of life. But meanwhile, what happens to it? From the passage in the Phaedo, which tells us how it presents the soul to judgment, we gather that after the death it resumes the form it had before the birth, but that then, beginning again, it is present to the souls in their punishment in the period before their renewed life, a time not so much of living as of expiation. But the souls that enter into brute bodies, are they controlled by something less than this presiding spirit? No, theirs is still a spirit, but an evil or a foolish one. And the souls that attain to the highest? Of these higher souls, some live in the world of sense, some above it, and those in the world of sense inhabit the sun or another of the planetary bodies. The others occupy the fixed sphere above the planetary, holding the place they have merited through having lived here the superior life of reason. We must understand that, while our souls do contain an intellectual cosmos, they also contain a subordination of various forms like that of the cosmic soul. The world soul is distributed so as to produce the fixed sphere, and the planetary circuits corresponding to its graded powers. So with our souls, they must have their provinces according to their different powers, parallel to those of the world soul. Each must give out its own special act. Released, each will inhabit there a star consonant with that temperament and faculty and act with and constituting the principle of the life. And this star, on the next highest power, will stand to them as God, or more exactly as tutelary spirit. But here some further precision is needed. Emancipated souls, for the whole period of their sojourn there above, have transcended the spirit nature and the entire fatality of birth and all that belongs to this visible world, for they have taken up with them the hypostasis of the soul in which the desire of earthly life is vested. This hypostasis may be described as the distributable soul, for what enters bodily forms and multiplies itself by this division among them. But its distribution is not arithmetical, not a matter of magnitudes. Wherever it is present, there is the same thing present entire. Its unity can always be reconstructed. When living things, animal or vegetable, distribute themselves and produce their constant succession of new forms, they do so in virtue of the self-distribution of this phase of the soul, for it must be as much distributed among the new forms as the propagating originals are. In some cases, it communicates its force by permanent presence, the life principle in plants, for instance. In other cases, it withdraws after imparting its virtue, for instance, where from the putridity of dead animal or vegetable matter, a multitudinous birth is produced from one organism. A power corresponding to this in the all must reach down and cooperate in the life of our world. In fact, the very same power. If the soul returns to this sphere, it finds itself under the same spirit or anew, according to the life it is to live. With this spirit it embarks in the skiff of the universe. The spindle of necessity then takes control and appoints the seat for the voyage, the seat of the lot in life. The universal circuit is like a breeze, and the voyager, still or stirring, is carried forward by it. He has 100 varied experiences, fresh sights, changing circumstances, all sorts of events. The vessel itself furnishes incident, tossing as it drives on. And the voyager also acts of himself in virtue of the individuality which he retains because he is on the vessel in his own person and character. Under identical circumstances, individuals answer very differently in their movements and desires and acts. Hence it comes about that, be the occurrences and conditions of life similar or dissimilar, the result may differ from man to man, as on the other hand a similar result may be produced by dissimilar conditions. This force of circumstance it is that constitutes destiny. End of the fourth tractate of the Third Ennead. Plotinus Third Ennead. Fifth Tractate. Love. 1. What is love? A god? A celestial spirit? A state of mind? Or is it perhaps sometimes to be thought of as a god or spirit, and sometimes merely as an experience? And what is it essentially in each of these respects? These important questions make it desirable to review prevailing opinions on the matter, the philosophical treatment it has received, and especially the theories of the great Plato, who has many passages dealing with love, from a point of view entirely his own. Plato does not treat of it as simply a state observed in souls. He also makes it a spirit being, so that we read of the birth of Eros, under definite circumstances and by a certain parentage. Now, everyone recognizes that the emotional state for which we make this love responsible rises in souls aspiring to be knit in the closest union with some beautiful object, and that this aspiration takes two forms, that of the good whose devotion is for beauty itself, and that other which seeks its consummation in some vile act. But this generally admitted distinction opens a new question. We need a philosophical investigation into the origin of the two phases. It is sound, I think, to find the primal source of love in a tendency of the soul towards pure beauty, in a recognition, in a kinship, in an unreasoned consciousness of friendly relation. The vile and ugly is in clash at once with nature and with God. Nature produces by looking to the good, for it looks towards order, which has its being in the consistent total of the good, while the unordered is ugly, a member of the system of evil. And besides, Nature itself clearly springs from the divine realm, from good and beauty, and when anything brings delight and the sense of kinship, its very image attracts. Reject this explanation, and no one can tell how the mental state rises and what are its causes. It is the explanation of even copulative love, which is the will to beget in beauty. Nature seeks to produce the beautiful, and therefore, by all reason, cannot desire to procreate in the ugly. Those that desire earthly procreation are satisfied with the beauty found on earth, the beauty of image and of body. It is because they are strangers to the archetype, the source of even the attraction they feel towards what is lovely here. There are souls to whom earthly beauty is a leading to the memory of that in the higher realm, and these love the earthly as an image. Those that have not attained to this memory do not understand what is happening within them and take the image for the reality. Once there is perfect self-control, it is no fault to enjoy the beauty of earth. Where the appreciation degenerates into carnality, there is sin. Pure love seeks the beauty alone, whether there is reminiscence or not. But there are those that feel, also, a desire of such immortality as lies within mortal reach. And these are seeking beauty in their demand for perpetuity, the desire of the eternal. Nature teaches them to sow the seed and to beget in beauty, to sow towards eternity, but in beauty through their own kinship with the beautiful. And indeed, the eternal is of the one stock with the beautiful. The eternal nature is the first shaping of beauty and makes beautiful all that rises from it. The less the desire for procreation, the greater is the contentment with beauty alone. Yet procreation aims at the engendering of beauty. It is the expression of a lack. The subject is conscious of insufficiency and, wishing to produce beauty, feels that the way is to beget in a beautiful form. Where the procreative desire is lawless or against the purposes of nature, the first inspiration has been natural, but they have diverged from the way. They have slipped and fallen, and they grovel. They neither understand whither love sought to lead them, nor have they any instinct to reproduction. They have not mastered the right use of the images of beauty. They do not know what the authentic beauty is. Those that love beauty of person without carnal desire love for beauty's sake. Those that have, for women, of course, the copulative love, have the further purpose of self-perpetuation. As long as they are led by these motives, both are on the right path, though the first have taken the nobler way. But even in the right, there is the difference that the one set, worshipping the beauty of earth, look no further, while the others, those of recollection, venerate also the beauty of the other world, while they still have no contempt for this in which they recognize, as it were, a last outgrowth and attenuation of the higher. These, in sum, are innocent frequenters of beauty, not to be confused with the class to whom it becomes an occasion of fall into the ugly. For the aspiration towards a good degenerates into an evil often. So much for love, the state. Now we have to consider love, the God. 2. The existence of such a being is no demand of the ordinary man, merely. It is supported by theologians, Orphic teachers, and over again by Plato, to whom Eros is child of Aphrodite, minister of beautiful children, inciter of human souls towards the supernal beauty, or quickener of an already existing impulse thither. All this requires philosophical examination. A cardinal passage is that in the banquet, where we are told Eros was not a child of Aphrodite, but born on the day of Aphrodite's birth, Penia, poverty, being the mother, and Poros, possession, the father. The matter seems to demand some discussion of Aphrodite, since in any case Eros is described as being either her son or in some association with her. Who then is Aphrodite, and in what sense is love either her child, or born with her, or in some way both her child and her birthfellow? To us, Aphrodite is twofold. There is the heavenly Aphrodite, daughter of Uranus or heaven, and there is the other, the daughter of Zeus and Dione. This is the Aphrodite who presides over earthly unions. The higher was not born of a mother and has no part in marriages, for in heaven there is no marrying. The heavenly Aphrodite, daughter of Kronos, Saturn, who is no other than the intellectual principle, must be the soul at its divinest, unmingled as the immediate emanation of the unmingled, remaining ever above, as neither desirous nor capable of descending to this sphere, never having developed the downward tendency, a divine hypostasis essentially aloof, so unreservedly an authentic being as to have no part with matter, and therefore mythically the unmothered, justly called not celestial spirit, but God, as knowing no admixture gathered cleanly within itself. Any nature springing directly from the intellectual principle must be itself also a clean thing. It will derive a resistance of its own from its nearness to the highest, for all its tendency, no less than its fixity, centers upon its author, whose power is certainly sufficient to maintain it above. Soul then could never fall from its sphere. It is closer held to the divine mind than the very sun could hold the light it gives forth to radiate about it, an outpouring from itself held firmly to it still. But following upon Kronos, or, if you will, upon heaven, Uranus, the father of Kronos, the soul directs its act towards him and holds closely to him, and in that love brings forth the Eros, through whom it continues to look towards him. This act of the soul has produced an hypostasis, a real being, and the mother and this hypostasis, her offspring, noble love, gaze together upon divine mind. Love, thus, is ever intent upon that other loveliness, and exists to be the medium between desire and that object of desire. It is the eye of the desire. By its power, what loves is enabled to see the loved thing. But it is first, before it becomes the vehicle of vision, it is itself filled with the sight. It is first, therefore, not even in the same order, for desire attains to vision only through the efficacy of love, while love, in its own act, harvests the spectacle of beauty playing immediately above it. 3. That love is a hypostasis, a person, a real being sprung from a real being, lower than the parent but authentically existent, is beyond doubt. For the parent soul was a real being sprung directly from the act of the hypostasis that ranks before it. It had life. It was a constituent in the real being of all that authentically is, in the real being which looks rapt towards the very highest. That was the first object of its vision. It looked towards it as toward its good, and it rejoiced in the looking, and the quality of what it saw was such that the contemplation could not be void of effect. In virtue of that rapture, of its position in regard to its object, of the intensity of its gaze, the soul conceived and brought forth an offspring worthy of itself and of the vision. Thus there is a strenuous activity of contemplation in the soul. There is an emanation towards it from the object contemplated, and Eros is born, the love which is an eye filled with its vision, a seeing that bears its image with it. Eros, taking its name probably from the fact that its essential being is due to this, as the Greek would say, orasis, this seeing. Of course, love, as an emotion, will take its name from love. The person, since a real being cannot but be prior to what lacks this reality. The mental state will be designated as love, like the hypostasis, though it is no more than a particular act directed towards a particular object, but it must not be confused with the absolute love, the divine being. The eros that belongs to the supernal soul must be of one temper with it. It must itself look aloft as being of the household of that soul, dependent upon that soul, its very offspring, and therefore caring for nothing but the contemplation of the gods. Once that soul, which is the primal source of light to the heaven, is recognized as an hypostasis standing distinct and aloof, it must be admitted that love too is distinct and aloof. To describe the soul as celestial is not to question its separateness or immateriality. Our own best we conceive as inside ourselves and yet something apart. So we must think of this love as essentially resident where the unmingling soul inhabits. But besides this pure soul, there must be also a soul of the all. At once there is another love, the eye with which this second soul looks upwards, like the supernal Eros engendered by force of desire. This Aphrodite, the secondary soul, is of this universe, not soul unmingled alone, not soul the absolute, giving birth, therefore, to the love concerned with the universal life. No, this is the love presiding over marriages, but it also has its touch of the upward desire, and in the degree of that striving, it stirs and leads upward the souls of the young and every soul with which it is incorporated, insofar as there is a natural tendency to remembrance of the divine. For every soul is striving towards the good, even the mingling soul and that of particular beings, for each holds directly from the divine soul and is its offspring. 4. Does each individual soul then contain within itself such a love in essence and substantial reality? Since not only the pure all soul but also that of the universe contains such a love, it would be difficult to explain why our personal soul should not. It must be so, even with all that has life. This indwelling love is no other than the spirit which, as we are told, walks with every being, the affection dominant in each several nature. It implants the characteristic desire, the particular soul, strained towards its own natural objects, brings forth its own eros, the guiding spirit realizing its worth and the quality of its being. As the all soul contains the universal love, so must the single soul be allowed its own single love, and as closely as the single soul holds to the all soul, never cut off but embraced within it, the two together, constituting one principle of life. So the single separate love holds to the all love. Similarly, the individual love keeps with the individual soul as that other, the great love, goes with the all soul, and the love within the all permeates it throughout, so that the one love becomes many, showing itself where it chooses at any moment of the universe, taking definite shape in these its partial phases, and revealing itself at its will. In the same way, we must conceive many Aphrodites in the all, spirits entering it together with love, all emanating from an Aphrodite of the all, a train of particular Aphrodites dependent upon the first, and each with a particular love in attendance. This multiplicity cannot be denied, if soul be the mother of love, and Aphrodite means soul, and love be an act of a soul seeking good. This love, then, leader of particular souls to the good, is twofold. The love in the loftier soul would be a God ever linking the soul to the divine. The love in the mingling soul would be a celestial spirit. 5. But what is the nature of the spirit of the celestial daemons in general? The spirit kind is treated in the symposium where, with much about the others, we learn of Eros, love, born to Penia, poverty, and Poros, possession, who is son of Metis, resource, at Aphrodite's birth feast. But the passage has been misunderstood, for to take Plato as meaning by Eros this universe, and not simply the love native within it, involves much that is self-contradictory. For one thing, the universe is described as a blissful God and as self-sufficing, while this love is confessedly neither divine nor self-sufficing, but in ceaseless need. Again, this cosmos is a compound of body and soul, but Aphrodite to Plato is the soul itself. Therefore, Aphrodite would necessarily be a constituent part of Eros, not mother, but dominant member. A man is the man's soul. If the world is similarly the world's soul, then Aphrodite, the soul, is identical with love, the cosmos. And why should this one spirit, love, be the universe to the exclusion of all the others, which certainly are sprung from the same essential being? Our only escape would be to make the cosmos a complex of celestials. Love again is called the dispenser of beautiful children. Does this apply to the universe? Love is represented as homeless, bedless, and barefooted. Would not that be a shabby description of the cosmos and quite out of the truth? 6. What then, in sum, is to be thought of love and of his birth as we are told of it. Clearly, we have to establish the significance here of poverty and possession, and show in what way the parentage is appropriate. We have also to bring these two into line with the other celestials, since one spirit nature, one spirit essence, must characterize all unless they are to have merely a name in common. We must, therefore, lay down the grounds on which we distinguish the gods from the celestials. That is, when we emphasize the separate nature of the two orders and are not as often in practice including these spirits under the common name of gods. It is our teaching and conviction that the gods are immune to all passion, while we attribute experience and emotion to the celestials which, though eternal beings indirectly next to the gods, are already a step towards ourselves and stand between the divine and the human. But by what process of degeneration was the immunity lost? What in their nature led them downwards to the inferior? And other questions present themselves. Does the intellectual realm include no member of the spirit order, not even one? And does the cosmos contain only these spirits, God being confined to the intellectual? Or are there gods in the sub-celestial too, the cosmos itself being a god, the third, as is commonly said, and the powers down to the moon being all gods as well? It is best not to use the word celestial of any being of that realm. The word God may be applied to the essential celestial, the autodaemon, if he exists, and even the visible powers of the universe of sense down to the moon. Gods, these two visible, secondary, sequent upon the gods of the intellectual realm, consonant with them, held about them as the radiance about the star. What then are these spirits? A celestial is the representative generated by each soul when it enters the cosmos. And why by a soul entering the cosmos? Because soul pure of the cosmos generates not a celestial spirit, but a god. Hence it is that we have spoken of love, offspring of Aphrodite, the pure soul, as a god. But first, what prevents every one of the celestials from being an eros, a love? And why are they not untouched by matter like the gods? On the first question, every celestial born in the striving of the soul towards the good and beautiful is an eros. And all the souls within the cosmos do engender this celestial, but other spirit beings equally born from the soul of the all, but by other faculties of that soul, have other functions. They are for the direct service of the all, and administer particular things to the purpose of the universe entire. The soul of the all must be adequate to all that is, and therefore must bring into being spirit powers serviceable not merely in one function, but to its entire charge. But what participation can the celestial have in matter, and in what matter? Certainly none in bodily matter. That would make them simply living things of the order of sense. And if, even, they are to invest themselves in bodies of air or of fire, their nature must have already been altered before they could have any contact with the corporeal. The pure does not mix, unmediated with body, though may think that the celestial kind of its very essence comports a body aerial or of fire. But since this is not so, why should one order of celestial descend to body and another not? The difference implies the existence of some cause or medium working upon such as thus descend. What would constitute such a medium? We are forced to assume that there is a matter of the intellectual order, and that beings partaking of it are thereby enabled to enter into the lower matter, the corporeal. 7. This is the significance of Plato's account of the birth of love. The drunkenness of the father, boros, or possession, is caused by nectar, wine yet not existing. Love is born before the realm of sense has come into being. Penia, poverty, had participation in the intellectual before the lower image of that divine realm had appeared. She dwelt in that sphere, but has mingled, consisting partly of form, but partly also of that indetermination which belongs to the soul before she attains the good, when all her knowledge of reality is a foreintimation veiled by the indeterminate and unordered. in this state of forefeeling and desiring the good, poverty brings forth the hypostasis, love. This, then, is a union of reason with something that is not reason, but a mere indeterminate striving in a being not yet illuminated. The offspring, love, therefore, is not perfect, not self-sufficient, but unfinished, bearing the signs of its parentage, the undirected striving, and the self-sufficient reason. This offspring is a reason principle, but not purely so, for it includes within itself an aspiration ill-defined, unreasoned, unlimited. It can never be sated as long as it contains within itself that element of the indeterminate. Love then clings to the soul, from which it sprang as from the principle of its being, but it is lessened by including an element of the reason principle which did not remain self-concentrated, but blended with the indeterminate, not, it is true, by immediate contact, but through its emanation. Love, therefore, is like a goad. It is without resource in itself. Even winning its end, it is poor again. It cannot be satisfied because a thing of mixture never can be so. True satisfaction is only for what has its plenitude in its own being. When craving is due to an inborn deficiency, there may be satisfaction at some given moment, but it does not last. Love, then, has on the one side the powerlessness of its native inadequacy, on the other the resource inherited from the reason kind. Such must be the nature and such the origin of the entire spirit order. Each, like its fellow, love, has its appointed sphere, it's powerful there, and wholly devoted to it, and, like love, none is ever complete of itself, but always straining towards some good which it sees in things of the partial sphere. We understand now why good men have no other love, no other arrows of life, than that for the absolute and authentic good, and never follow the random attractions known to those ranged under the lower spirit kind. Each human being is set under his own spirit guides, but this is mere blank possession, when they ignore their own and live by some other spirit adopted by them, as more closely attuned to the operative part of the soul in them. Those that go after evil are natures that have merged all the love principles within them in the evil desires springing in the hearts, and allowed the right reason, which belongs to our kind, to fall under the spell of false ideas from another source. All the natural loves, all that serve the ends of nature, are good. In lesser soul, inferior in rank and in scope, in the greater soul, superior, but all belong to the order of being. Those forms of love that do not serve the purposes of nature are merely accidents attending on perversion. In no sense are they real beings, or even manifestations of a reality, for they are no true issue of soul. They are merely accompaniments of a spiritual flaw which the soul automatically exhibits in the total of disposition and conduct. In a word, all that is truly good in a soul acting to the purpose on nature and within its appointed order, all this is real being. Anything else is alien, no act of the soul, but merely something that happens to it. A parallel may be found in false mentation, notions behind which then is no reality as there is in the case of authentic ideas. The eternal, the strictly defined, in which there is at once an act of true knowing, a truly knowable object and authentic existence, and this is not merely in the absolute, but also in the particular being that is occupied by the authentically knowable and by the intellectual principle manifest in every several form. In each particular human being, we must admit the existence of the authentic intellective act and of the authentically knowable object, though not as wholly merged into our being, since we are not these in the absolute and not exclusively these. It follows that love, like our intellectual activities, is concerned with absolute things. If we sometimes care for the partial, that affection is not direct but accidental, like our knowledge that give a triangular figure is made up of two right angles because the absolute triangle is so. 8. But what are we to understand by this Zeus with the garden into which we are told Poros or wealth entered? And what is the garden? We have seen that Aphrodite of the myth is the soul, and that Poros, wealth, is the reason principle of the universe. We have still to explain Zeus and his garden. We cannot take Zeus to be the soul, which we have agreed is represented by Aphrodite. Plato, who must be our guide in this question, speaks in the Phaedrus of this god, Zeus, as the great leader, though elsewhere he seems to rank him as one of three. But in the Philebus he speaks more plainly when he says that there is in Zeus not only a royal soul, but also a royal intellect. As a mighty intellect and soul, he must be a principle of cause. He must be the highest for several reasons, but especially because to be king and leader is to be the chief cause. Zeus then is the intellectual principle. Aphrodite, his daughter, issue of him, dwelling with him, will be soul. Her very name, Aphrodite, as the Greek refer, abra, meaning delicate, indicating the beauty and gleam and innocence and delicate grace of the soul. And if we take the male gods to represent the intellectual powers and the female gods to be their souls, to every intellectual principle its companion soul, we are forced thus also to make Aphrodite the soul of Zeus. And the identification is confirmed by priests and theologians who consider Aphrodite and Hera one and the same and call Aphrodite star, Venus, the star of Hera. 9. This poros, possession, then, is the reason principle of all that exists in the intellectual realm and in the supreme intellect. But being more diffused, kneaded out as it were, it must touch soul, be in soul as the next lower principle. For all that lies gathered in the intellect is native to it, nothing enters from without. But poros, intoxicated, is some power deriving satisfaction outside itself. What then can we understand by this member of the Supreme filled with nectar, but a reason principle falling from a loftier essence to a lower? This means that the reason principle, upon the birth of Aphrodite, left the intellectual for the soul, breaking into the garden of Zeus. A garden is a place of beauty and a glory of wealth. All the loveliness that Zeus maintains takes its splendor from the reason principle within him. For all this beauty is the radiation of the divine intellect upon the divine soul, which it has penetrated. What could the garden of Zeus indicate but the images of his being and the splendors of his glory? And what could these divine splendors and beauties be but the reason principles streaming from him? These reason principles, this poros who is the lavishness, the abundance of beauty, are at one and are made manifest. This is the nectar drunkenness. For the nectar of the gods can be no other than what the god nature receives from outside itself, and that whose place is after the divine mind, namely soul, receives a reason principle. The intellectual principle possesses itself to satiety, but there is no drunken abandonment in this possession, which brings nothing alien to it. But the reason principle, as its offspring, a later hypostasis, is already a separate being and established in another realm, and so is said to lie in the garden of this Zeus, who is divine mind. And this lying in the garden takes place at the moment when, in our way of speaking, Aphrodite enters the realm of being. Our way of speaking, for myths, if they are to serve their purpose, must necessarily import time distinctions into their subject and will often present as separate powers which exist in unity but differ in rank and faculty. And does not philosophy itself relate the births of the unbegotten and discriminate where all is one substance? The truth is conveyed in the only manner possible. It is left to our good sense to bring all together again. On this principle we have here soul, successively, dwelling with the divine intelligence, breaking away from it, and yet again being filled to satiety with reason principles, the beautiful abounding in all plenty, so that every splendor become manifest in with the images of whatever is lovely. Soul which, taken as one all, is Aphrodite, while in it may be distinguished the reason principles summed under the names of plenty and possession, produced by the downflow of the nectar of the overrealm. The splendors contained in soul are thought of as the garden of Zeus, with reference to their existing within life. And Poros sleeps in this garden in the sense of being sated and heavy with its produce. Life is eternally manifest, an eternal existent among the existences, and the banqueting of the gods means no more than that they have their being in that vital blessedness. And love, born at the banquet of the gods, has of necessity been eternally in existence, for it springs from the intention of the soul towards its best, towards the good. As long as soul has been, love has been. Still, this love is of mixed quality. On the one hand, there is in it the lack which keeps it craving. On the other, it is not entirely destitute. The deficient seeks more of what it has, and certainly nothing absolute void of good would ever go seeking the good. It is said then to spring from poverty and possession in the sense that lack and aspiration and the memory of the reason principles all present together in the soul produce that act towards the good which is love. Its mother is poverty, since striving is for the needy, and this poverty is matter, for matter is the wholly poor. The very ambition towards the good is a sign of existing indetermination. There is a lack of shape and of reason in that which must aspire towards the good, and the greater degree of effort implies the lower depth of materiality. A thing aspiring towards the good is an ideal principle only when the striving with attainment will leave it still unchanged in kind. When it must take in something other than itself, its aspiration is the presentment of matter to the incoming power. Thus love is, at once, in some degree, a thing of matter, and at the same time, a celestial sprung of the soul's unsatisfied longing for the good. This is the end of the 5th tractate of Plotinus's Third Ennead. Please do meet me at the next video as we continue with the reading of Plotinus's Third Ennead. If you haven't done so yet, please do hit the like button and share this with your friends.